The wind did not move through the Montana high country. It hunted. It slid between the trees like something alive, dragging its breath across frozen ground, whispering old warnings to bark and stone. It remembered every winter that had broken men who thought themselves strong, and in the year 1891, it came searching again. Before this story goes any further, before the trail disappears and the cold closes in, take a moment to like and subscribe. These stories survive the way people once did out here, quietly, through loyalty. Now listen closely, because this is not a story about rescue. It is a story about what happens when the world decides a man is finished, and a woman chooses to walk into the wilderness anyway. Eliza Crow stepped off the train at Black Hollow Station with no one waiting for her. The platform sagged beneath old snow. Boards split and warped from years of neglect. Coal smoke clung low in the air, bitter and heavy, coating the back of her throat with the taste of burned iron. Somewhere down the line, a whistle screamed once and vanished into the distance, leaving behind only silence and the slow creak of cooling steel. The train did not linger. It never did for people like her. Eliza stood with a single leather valise at her feet, fingers stiff even inside her gloves. Everything she had left in the world fit inside that bag. 2 dresses worn thin at the seams, a notebook filled with careful handwriting, a pair of gloves patched at the fingertips, and a folded letter she had already read so many times, the creases had softened like cloth. She had come west because the East had taken everything else. Her father's factory collapsed under debt, and men who smiled while they stripped it bare. Her mother followed it into the ground less than a year later, her lungs ruined by air that never stopped burning. And Eliza, too educated for servant work, too poor for anything better, had learned quickly how invisible a woman became when she had nothing left to offer but endurance. Montana was not a dream. It was a last sentence written in frost. The station marshal confirmed that truth without hesitation. No husband, no job contract, no room, he said, barely glancing up from his ledger. Boarding houses won't take single women through winter. You can catch the eastbound in the morning, if the track's clear. Eliza nodded, because nodding cost less than pleading. She stepped back onto the platform, the cold already working its way through her boots, and that was when she felt it. Not eyes. Weight. A presence that made the air feel heavier than it should have. Men lingered near the station. Trappers waiting on supplies, miners killing time until dark. They laughed too loudly. They stared without shame. But one man stood apart from them all, beneath the shadow of the overhang, still as the mountain itself. They called him Elias Granger. She would learn that later. To Black Hollow, he was something else entirely. A warning. His coat was stitched from hides instead of cloth, patched carefully, not desperately. His boots were wrapped in leather and cord, handmade and built for terrain no road ever touched. Snow clung to him as if it belonged there. His beard was dark and untrimmed. His hair fell loose against his shoulders. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Not wild, not cruel, deep, quiet. Like water frozen solid without forgetting what it was underneath. Someone muttered nearby, "That's Granger, mountain man. Lives above the timberline." Another voice answered, low and sharp. "Should have frozen years ago." Eliza did not look away. Neither did he. When Elias spoke, his voice was roughened by cold and distance, but steady. "I have land," he said. Not loudly. Not to anyone else. To her. "A cabin. It's high. The walk is hard." He paused, measuring her not as a woman, but as a body that would need to endure. "But you'd be safe." Safe. The word landed harder than kindness ever could. Eliza glanced back at the station office, then at the empty tracks, then at the men who watched her like a problem they already knew how to solve. Desperation wears many disguises. So does survival. "What would you want from me?" she asked. Elias did not answer right away. When he did, his gaze never wavered. A wife. In the eyes of the law. Nothing more unless you choose it. No promises. No lies. Just terms laid bare like winter ground. The judge performed the ceremony in a narrow back room that smelled of ink and old coffee. 5 minutes. 2 signatures. A ring Elias produced from a leather cord. Simple silver, worn smooth by time. When it was finished, the judge cleared his throat and said, "Good luck to you, Mrs. Granger." Luck had nothing to do with it. By sundown, Eliza Crow no longer existed in the eyes of the town. Elias lifted her valise onto his back as though it weighed nothing. He did not turn toward the road that led back to Black Hollow. He turned toward the mountains. "Stay in my tracks," he said. "If you fall, fall forward." The forest swallowed them whole. The air smelled of pine pitch and ancient snow. Sound thinned the deeper they went. No birds, no wind. Only the crunch of Elias's boots and the shallow rhythm of Eliza's breath. He moved like the land recognized him. Not above it, with it. When she slipped on ice, his hand appeared before she hit the ground. Calloused, warm, unquestioning. They climbed until the town ceased to exist. Night fell fast. Snow began to fall sideways, sharp as needles. The wind rose, screaming through the trees, like something furious at being denied a name. Elias stopped beneath a stone overhang, just as the storm turned violent. "We wait," he said. "There's no cabin?" Eliza asked, fear tightening in her chest. "Not yet." He built a fire the way a man builds something he has practiced many times before. Slow, patient, exact. Sparks coaxed from flint and steel. Moss, dry needles, flame. He handed her a strip of bark. "Chew," he said. "Helps with the air." That night, the mountain roared. Eliza slept wrapped in his hide coat, listening to his breathing, counting it like proof the world had not ended. Morning did not arrive with sunlight. It arrived with quiet. The storm did not retreat so much as collapse, as if the mountain itself had grown tired of shouting. Snow fell straight instead of sideways. The wind thinned to a distant murmur, and in that sudden absence of violence, the world felt fragile, like something that might shatter if spoken to too loudly. Eliza woke stiff and cold, her limbs aching from the climb. For a moment, panic flickered. She did not know where she was or how she had come to be wrapped in rough hide instead of blankets. Then she heard breathing beside her, slow, even, unafraid. Elias was already awake. He crouched near the fire pit, coaxing life from embers that had survived the night. He did not rush. He never rushed. Watching him work, Eliza realized something that unsettled her more than the storm had. He had not been afraid. Not once. "We move soon," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts, "before the mountain decides otherwise." She nodded, though she had no idea what that meant. When they stepped out from beneath the overhang, the world looked newly made. Snow blanketed everything in white silence. The trees stood bowed, their branches heavy and still. Above them, the sky hung low and colorless. They climbed. The forest thinned as they gained elevation. Pines shrank into twisted sentinels. Dirt gave way to exposed stone, slick with ice and unforgiving. The air burned her lungs now, thin and sharp, stealing strength with every breath. Elias stopped often, not from exhaustion, but to listen. He tilted his head slightly, as if the mountain spoke in a language Eliza could not yet hear. Once, she slipped. Her boot slid on ice, and the world tipped sideways. Before fear could find a voice, Elias caught her, hauling her against his chest with a strength that felt endless. He pulled her into a narrow break between stones, shielding her from the wind. "Still," he said. She obeyed. He wrapped her in his heavy hide, pressing her close without hesitation or embarrassment. His heartbeat was steady, his breath unbroken. "Body heat," he said simply. "That's what matters now." Snow lashed the rocks around them, but inside that small shelter, time slowed. Elias spoke softly then, not to distract her, but to anchor her. He talked about stars, about how men once crossed continents by reading light in the dark, about how the mountain bent storms the way rivers bent land, patient and absolute. His words were measured, educated. Eliza listened, her cheek pressed against his chest, and realized the town had been wrong about him in every way that mattered. When the wind finally eased, it did so reluctantly. Elias pulled back and stood, offering his hand again. She took it without thinking. They climbed higher. Above the last stand of trees, the world opened into stone and sky. Clouds slid beneath them like a living sea. The air warmed unexpectedly, softened by something unseen. Elias stopped. He brushed aside frost-covered branches, clinging to a sheer rock face. Stone steps emerged, carved. Not crude, not desperate. Deliberate. Eliza's breath caught. "These," she began. "Watch your footing," Elias said gently. They climbed the steps in silence. The passage curved inward, narrow at first, then widening just enough for breath to come easier. Light filtered ahead, not the harsh glare of snow, but something warmer, almost golden. Then the path opened, and the world broke open with it. A valley lay hidden beneath the mountain's ribs, untouched by winter. Steam rose from clear pools scattered among stone and grass. Green spread where green should not exist, thick and alive. Sunlight poured down through a break in the clouds, as if the sky itself had been waiting for this place to be seen again. Eliza stopped walking. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes insisted was real. At the center of the valley stood a house, not a cabin, A house of stone, timber, and glass, wide and grounded, built into the land rather than imposed upon it. Its walls rose from rock, as if grown instead of placed. Tall windows caught the light and returned it gently. Smoke drifted from a chimney with quiet discipline. Elias waited beside her, unmoving. "This isn't possible," Eliza whispered. "It is," he said, "because it had to be." They descended slowly. With every step, the cold loosened its grip. Eliza pulled off her gloves and stared at her hands as warmth returned without pain. The ground beneath her boots gave slightly, alive and forgiving. The valley did not rush to greet her. It waited. At the house, Elias paused before the door. "This place bends the mountain," he said. "The ridges break the wind. The springs warm the stone. It stays hidden unless you already know how to listen." He opened the door. Warmth met them. Not the choking heat of a fire trapped in a small room, but a steady, breathing warmth that moved through the house like a living thing. Slate floors absorbed the day's light. Cedar beams rose clean and strong overhead. The air smelled of wood and water instead of smoke. Eliza stepped inside and felt her legs weaken. Books lined the walls, not a few. Hundreds. Real volumes, worn from use rather than neglect. Architecture, engineering, botany, astronomy, philosophy. She moved slowly, afraid to disturb the space, her fingers brushing spines she recognized from another life. At the center of the room stood a long table covered in drawings. Plans layered upon plans, careful lines, measurements, vision made tangible. "This is where I worked," Elias said. "When storms trapped me here, when the world below grew too loud." He lit oil lamps one by one. The light revealed more shelves, more tools, more proof that this place had been built not in desperation, but in patience. They ate simply. Dried meat, roots softened in warm water, drawn from a stone basin. Eliza stared as the water flowed freely. "The spring sits higher," Elias explained. "Pressure does the work." That night, Eliza slept in a real bed, wrapped in clean wool, listening not to wind, but to silence that felt earned. Morning came gently. Outside, snow raged somewhere beyond the ridges, but here the valley breathed calmly. Elias showed her the gardens warmed by channels of spring water, the storage rooms where food and tools were arranged with care. "You planned for everything," Eliza said. "I planned to survive," Elias replied. Living came later. Days unfolded without urgency. Eliza learned the valley's rhythms. Elias taught her which plants healed and which harmed, how to read the sky even when clouds hid the sun, how to hear warning in silence. In return, Eliza brought order to the scattered journals and loose papers that filled the house. She sorted them, preserved them, wrote down methods grief had once interrupted. Elias watched her with quiet gratitude. Trust took root where solitude had lived. One evening, as the fire burned low and snow pressed against the windows, Eliza found a gold locket tucked into a drawer. Inside, a woman in Eastern silk. She held it out when Elias entered the room. He did not reach for it immediately. "My wife," he said, "before." He sat across from her and spoke of a different life, of cities and buildings and applause, of a woman whose lungs failed as the city grew stronger, of leaving not to escape memory, but to survive it. "The mountain doesn't let you forget," he said quietly. "It strips you down until only truth remains." Eliza listened. She did not pity him. She understood him. And in that understanding, something between them shifted. Not romance, not obligation, but the steady alignment of two lives no longer running from themselves. Outside, the world below began to whisper. Above the clouds, the valley listened. Time did not pass normally in the hidden valley. It folded. Weeks slipped into one another, without edges. Days were not measured by dates, but by the way light angled across stone, by the sound water made as it moved through channels Elias had carved with patient hands. The valley did not reward urgency. Anything rushed here broke. Anything forced failed. Eliza learned that quickly. Elias woke before sunrise each morning, not from habit, but from instinct. He walked the valley perimeter in silence, touching stone seams, listening for changes most men would never notice. He read the mountain the way others read ledgers, his fingers tracing pressure and stress, as if the rock itself were speaking. She watched him at first from a distance. Then she began to follow. He taught her how to listen without demanding answers, how to stand still long enough for the land to reveal what it was already doing. Survival, Elias explained, was not dominance. It was cooperation. "You can always tell who won't last," he said once, adjusting a stone brace along a water channel. "They try to bend the land instead of asking what it allows." Eliza thought of factories, of cities, of her father's office stacked with papers promising growth without restraint. She thought of how quickly it had all collapsed. Inside the house, life grew quieter and deeper. They did not speak often of love. They did not need to. Love revealed itself in small, steady ways, in the way Elias always placed her boots closer to the hearth at night, in the way Eliza learned to leave his drafting tools exactly where his hands expected them to be. She became fluent in his silences. He became attentive to her pauses. Some evenings they worked at opposite ends of the long table, bound together by nothing more than shared presence. Those were the nights Eliza felt something inside her loosen, an ache she had carried since childhood. The need to justify her existence through usefulness. Here, she did not need to earn her place. The valley had already accepted her. Seasons turned above the clouds. Spring arrived late, but gently. Snow melted into singing streams. New growth pushed through soil, warmed by unseen heat. Together, they expanded the house. Not because it was necessary, but because building was Elias's language, and Eliza had learned how to help him finish sentences grief had once interrupted. Her suggestions were small at first, a window positioned to catch morning light, a shelf lowered to meet aging hands. Elias listened without pride, without resistance. Trust replaced solitude. One afternoon in late spring, Eliza followed Elias higher into the valley than she ever had before. The terrain shifted there, stone rising in layered shelves, like ribs beneath skin. Elias stopped beside a rock face, scarred with old tool marks. "This was my first winter," he said. Eliza touched the stone. "You did all this alone?" "Yes." "Why?" Elias considered the question longer than she expected. "Because no one was left to watch me fail." The answer stayed with her. Later that night, as they sat by the fire, Eliza asked him something she had never dared before. "Do you regret leaving?" Elias stared into the flames. "Some days," he said finally. "I miss the man I was becoming. I do not miss the man I was." Eliza understood that distinction. As years passed, she felt the quiet shift within herself, too. The sharpness she once carried, the constant readiness for loss, softened. Her dreams changed. She no longer dreamed of trains or crowded streets. She dreamed of stone, warmed by sun, of water running where it should not, of a place that did not ask her to be smaller. She began writing more than records. She wrote reflections, not for history, for memory. Elias never asked to read them. He respected what was not offered. Far below, the world began to struggle. Winters grew harsher. Crops failed. Black Hollow lost cattle, then wagons, then men. Hunger sharpened memory. Desperation gave rumor weight. They spoke of steam above the snow line, of green where no green should exist, of a man who came down from the mountains twice a year and never stayed long enough to be understood. Some laughed, others listened. Eliza felt the shift before Elias said anything. The birds vanished for longer stretches. The silence beyond the valley thickened, heavy with intent. "The world is remembering us," she said. "Yes," Elias replied, "and it always comes hungry." They prepared. Not with weapons, with absence. Paths were disguised, stone steps erased, growth encouraged to reclaim anything that hinted at intention. Elias dismantled part of his own work, careful not to wound the valley in the process. "I spent years teaching the mountain my name," he said quietly. "Now it must forget us." Eliza understood. Winter returned heavier than before. Storms stacked upon storms until the ridges vanished beneath white walls. Inside the house, life continued quietly. Eliza read aloud while Elias sketched. Sometimes history, sometimes poetry, sometimes nothing at all. Just the scratch of charcoal and the sound of fire breathing. One morning, Eliza noticed Elias standing at the table, longer than usual, brow furrowed. "Eliza," he said, "did I already reinforce the east vent?" She answered gently, "Yes, last autumn." Relief crossed his face too quickly. That night, Eliza lay awake listening to his breathing and understood something she had not wanted to name. The mountain took payment. Not cruelly, slowly. She responded the only way she knew how. She wrote. Every morning, after Elias went to check the channels,
She sat beneath the eastern window and opened a fresh page. She wrote the date the way he once had, by the angle of the sun and the melt of the snow. She wrote what he built, what he fixed, what he said. Not because she feared he would forget her, but because she feared the world would forget him. The journals became anchors. When Elias hesitated, she read his own words back to him, guided his hands without drawing attention to the guidance, carried memory the way he had once carried her through snow and fear. One autumn, a visitor found the valley. A boy, lost, terrified. His ankle twisted, his rifle useless across his back. They fed him, set his ankle, let him sleep near the fire. He stared at the house, the warmth, the impossible green, awe and fear tangled together. "Where is this?" he whispered. "A place that doesn't need a name," Eliza said. Elias walked him back to the safe descent when the storm broke. He gave him food and directions. "Do not speak of this place," he said. "If you do, it will disappear." The boy nodded. He never returned. Years softened them. Elias walked more slowly now, though his posture never bent. His hands shook sometimes in deep cold, but he never complained. Memory loosened its grip on him gently, like a tide retreating from shore. One winter night, Elias stared into the fire longer than usual. "When I'm gone," he said quietly, "will you stay?" Eliza did not answer immediately. "Yes," she said, "as long as the mountain allows it." From then on, they prepared not for death, but for continuity. Elias taught her every channel, every weakness, every trick the mountain had taught him. Eliza memorized them all, practiced until her hands moved with his confidence. Pride no longer lived between them, only care. The outside world reached upward in winter. It always did. Hunger made men brave in the wrong ways. Cold stripped away superstition and replaced it with need sharp enough to cut through reason. Down in Black Hollow, stores emptied and cattle froze where they stood. Snow pressed against doors like a question no one wanted to answer. Someone remembered Elias Granger. They spoke his name carefully now, as if it might answer back. A trapper claimed he had seen smoke far above the timberline. Steady smoke, disciplined smoke, not the wild flare of men lost and freezing. Another swore he had heard running water where no creek should exist. A third came back from the high country with frost-bitten fingers and a story so broken it sounded like madness. "There's warmth up there," he kept saying, "and light, and something watching." 3 men decided to climb. They were not foolish men. They brought rope, rifles, food enough for weeks. They brought certainty, which was their first mistake. The mountain turned them back without violence. Storms rose where the sky had been clear. Paths vanished beneath fresh snow. Sound died in ways that made men doubt their own breathing. Fear crept in, not as panic, but as hesitation. Quiet, corrosive, irresistible. Only one returned. He lasted 2 days before coughing blood into the snow. After that, no one tried again. Above the clouds, the valley breathed on. Eliza felt the shift long before danger reached them. The birds vanished for longer stretches. The silence beyond the ridges thickened, heavy with intention. "The world is restless," she said one evening. "Yes," Elias replied, "but it's tired." They did not prepare for violence. They prepared to be forgotten. Stone steps were erased, channels disguised. Growth encouraged to reclaim anything that hinted at intention. Elias dismantled part of his own work, careful and reverent, the way a man dismantles something sacred only when necessary. "I spent years teaching the mountain my name," he said quietly. "Now it must forget us." Time passed. Then illness came. Not suddenly, not dramatically. A cough at first. Fatigue that sleep did not fix. Heat beneath the skin that lingered too long. Eliza hid it. She had learned what sickness took from men like Elias. She would not make herself another weight he had to carry. But the mountain had taught him observation sharper than denial. "You're burning," he said one morning, touching her forehead. "It's nothing," she lied. By nightfall, she could not stand. Elias carried her to the bed, without panic, without words. He brewed from memory, bark, root, leaf, measured carefully, hands steady, even as fear crept into his bones. He did not sleep. For 2 nights, he watched her breathe. On the third, the fever worsened. Eliza drifted in and out of dreams. Train whistles, her mother's hands, the sound of stone cutting stone. She felt Elias beside her constantly, grounding her to the world, refusing to let her slip quietly away. At dawn of the 4th day, her breathing stopped, just for a moment. But moments are enough to break a man. Elias pressed his forehead to hers and begged the mountain, not for mercy, but for fairness. "You took my past," he whispered. "If you take my future too, I will tear you apart stone by stone." The fever broke before sunset. Eliza woke to tears soaking his hands. Neither of them spoke of it afterward, but something fundamental shifted. They no longer lived as if time were guaranteed. They lived as if it were sacred. Years softened them. Lines carved their faces the way water carves stone, not violently, but with intention. Elias walked more slowly now, though his posture never bent. His hands trembled sometimes in deep cold, but he never complained. Memory loosened its grip on him gently. One morning, he stood at the table, staring at his drawings longer than usual. "Eliza," he said quietly, "did I already reinforce the east vent?" "Yes," she answered. "Last autumn." Relief crossed his face too quickly. From that day on, Eliza wrote everything down, not because she feared he would forget her, but because she feared the world would forget him. She read his own words back to him when he hesitated, guided his hands without drawing attention to the guidance, carried memory the way he had once carried her through snow and fear. One autumn, Elias asked a question he had never asked before. "When I'm gone," he said, staring into the fire, "will you stay?" Eliza did not answer immediately. "Yes," she said finally, "as long as the mountain allows it." From then on, they prepared not for death, but for continuity. Elias taught her every channel, every structural weakness, Every trick the mountain had taught him. Eliza memorized them all, practiced until her hands moved with his confidence. Pride no longer lived between them, only care. The final winter before the end came gently. Snow fell soft beyond the ridges. Inside the house, warmth held steady. They spent evenings close to the fire, reading, listening, saying less because less was needed. One night, Elias said quietly, "I used to think building was about defying time." Eliza waited. "I was wrong," he continued. "It's about making something that knows when to stop." She took his hand. "Yes," she said. "It is." The last walk came without ceremony. Late summer lay gently over the valley, the air warm without weight, the sky stretched wide and forgiving. Insects hummed among the grasses. Water moved through the channels with a soft, familiar voice, as if repeating a story it had told many times before. Elias woke early that morning and sat at the edge of the bed, longer than usual, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing slow and even. "I'd like to go up today," he said. Eliza did not ask where. She knew. They climbed slowly. The path that once felt effortless now demanded patience. Elias paused often, not from pain, but from attention. He stopped to rest his hand against stone, to listen to the valley below, to watch clouds drift in long unhurried lines across the sky. Eliza stayed close without crowding him. They had learned that balance together. When they reached the ridge, Elias lowered himself onto the familiar stone and sat facing the valley. From here, the house looked small and complete, settled into the land as if it had always been meant to be there. The gardens traced quiet patterns of green. Steam rose lazily from the springs. Elias smiled. "I can see how it all fits now," he said. Eliza waited. "I used to think building was about defying time," he continued, "about making something last longer than a man." He shook his head slightly. "I was wrong." She did not interrupt. "It's about knowing when to stop," he said, "when to let the work speak for itself." They sat in silence as the sun dipped lower, painting the valley in gold and shadow. Elias leaned back, his shoulder resting against Eliza's arm. For a long time, his breathing remained steady. Then it slowed. Then it softened. Then it stopped. Eliza did not move. She stayed with him as the light faded, as the sky deepened into blue, as the valley breathed on below them without urgency or alarm. When she finally stood, she did so carefully, as if sudden movement might disturb something sacred. She buried him the next morning, not because the light demanded it, but because dawn felt honest. She chose a rise just above the house, where stone gave way to grass and the valley opened wide. From there, Elias could see everything he had shaped. The water channels glinting softly, the gardens waking, the house resting easy against the mountain, as if it belonged. She worked slowly. The ground was warm beneath the surface, softened by the springs that had kept this place alive through winters meant to kill. She used the tools Elias had shaped with his own hands, each movement deliberate, unhurried. When she was finished, she did not mark the place. No stone. No name. Just earth, returned to earth. She sat beside the grave until the sun cleared the ridge. "You built something good," she said quietly. You taught me how to keep it. The wind moved gently through the valley, stirring grass, carrying no answer that required words. Life continued. The first weeks were the hardest, not because of grief alone, but because of habit. Eliza would wake and listen for his footsteps, before remembering there would be none. She would turn to speak, then smile faintly at the silence that answered her. But the valley did not feel empty. It felt held. She kept the routines Elias had taught her. She checked the channels at dawn. She listened for changes in water and stone. She spoke to the house as she worked, narrating her movements the way he once had, grounding herself in sound. At night, she read. Sometimes his journals, sometimes her own. Seasons passed. The valley bloomed and slept and bloomed again. Eliza's hair silvered slowly. Her hands grew knotted and strong in a different way now, shaped by labor that was neither frantic nor forced. She never left the valley. She never wanted to. Once a year, she climbed the ridge and looked down toward the lowlands. Smoke still rose there. Towns still fought their endless battles against weather and want. People still searched for something they could not name. She felt no pull to join them. The world had already asked everything it was ever going to ask of her. She had answered. Years later, a hunter wandered too high during an early winter storm. He was young and exhausted, and certain he was about to die when Eliza found him tangled in brush near the outer edge of the valley. She brought him in, fed him, set his broken finger. He stared at the house, the warmth, the impossible green, fear tangled with awe. Where is this? He whispered. A place that doesn't need a name, Eliza said. When the storm broke, she walked him back to the safe descent. She gave him food, directions, and a warning spoken with the same calm Elias had once used. Do not try to return, she said. If you speak of this place, it will disappear. The boy nodded. He never came back. As Eliza aged, she prepared without urgency. She organized the journals one final time, binding loose pages, adding her own reflections not as instruction, but as memory. She wrote about Elias not as legend, but as a man, patient, stubborn, quietly kind. She wrote about herself, too, about fear, about choosing, about how survival without meaning was just another form of hunger. When the cold lingered too long in her bones, she recognized it. She did not resist. She prepared. One final winter settled over the valley, gentle and slow. Snow fell softly beyond the ridges. Inside the house, warmth held steady. Eliza spent her days near the windows, watching light move across stone, listening to water trace the same paths it always had. On her last morning, she climbed the ridge one final time. It took her longer than it used to. She did not mind. At the summit, she sat where Elias had once sat, looking out over the valley that had given them both a life the world never would have allowed. She smiled. I stayed, she said softly, just like I promised. When she lay down to rest, The mountain accepted her without sound. Spring came. The valley bloomed as it always had. Water flowed. Grass rose. Birds returned. The house stood quiet, its doors closed, its windows catching light without needing anyone to notice. Far below, the world continued its restless searching. New towns rose. Old ones collapsed. Stories were told and forgotten and told again. No one ever found the valley. And that was the point. Because the greatest shelter the West ever knew was not built of stone and glass alone. It was built of patience, restraint, and the courage to live beyond the reach of a world that only knew how to take. Eliza Crow had not been rescued from the cold. She had walked into it, climbed higher, and found a place where the wind no longer hunted, and the mountain, having taken everything it required, finally rested.